Perfect. Yeah. So I believe we're on record. So John, Paul, look, thanks for joining us on the MedTech Leaders podcast. I know we're just speaking offline, but just give a bit of an overview for everyone who's listening. Look, this podcast is designed for people within the industry that are looking to grow and develop, whether that's founders, leaders, directors. It could be of an engineering, technical, regulatory background. You guys have obviously gone on an interesting journey, which we'll go into. And yeah, if you can share any insights and advice for our audience, that would be appreciated. But probably useful for the audience as well if we just have a bit of a brief intro, if you don't mind, into your backgrounds. Don't know who wants to go first.
Go on, John.
Okay, so my name is John Neighbour. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Eventum Orthopedics. Worked in medical device industry for about 30 years. For about 24 years at one of the large MedTech corporations in mainly engineering, strategic marketing roles. And in about 2020, Paul and I founded Eventum Orthopedics to develop our QuadSense technology, which is all about helping surgeons improve outcomes in total knee surgery.
Awesome.
Lovely. Yeah, so I'm Paul Atherton. I'm COO and the other co-founder of Eventum Orthopedics. John and I work together, so I've got another long track record working for a major orthopedic company, or major medical device company within the industry, and that was where John and I met. I was predominantly commercial, so sales and marketing, and all of my stuff was based in UK and Ireland, really. So it was on, we both left the organization around a similar time. John came up with the idea, we got together, and then that was where the story started, really, back in, was it 2019 or
2020, March, almost like 6 years ago, almost right now.
Yeah.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. Do you mind let's just start from like that 2019 kind of point then, in terms of coming up with the idea of Eventum Orthopedics? How did that kind of come about? Do you mind going into that in a little bit of depth?
Yeah, sure. So I left big MedTech in the end of 19, and I was basically living down in Australia at the time, and I had about 12 weeks. Well, so we had an 8-week holiday touring Australia, and I took the opportunity to call in on the various salespeople that I'd worked with in Australia. So hooked up with people, had mainly social stuff. Towards the back end of that is where the idea started to percolate that, actually there's an area in knee surgery that's not being addressed, which was the kneecap. And it was kind of like, that seems like a good idea, and so forth. And honestly, if I hadn't, and basically met up with Paul in March, and if I hadn't had that conversation with Paul, I probably would have just thought, it's a nice idea, but is it really worth looking at? So Paul and I met, and he kind of said, oh yeah, it seems like a good idea. And that's really where the whole thing started. We were quite lucky in that we were able to build some prototypes in the garage, do some testing, and actually lockdown helped us because we could connect with surgeons because they weren't operating. Yeah. So, our network of surgeons we could connect with and sort of do some feedback on the idea. And it kind of grew from there, really.
Makes a lot of sense. Paul, I guess John just said there that he kind of had the idea and he potentially wouldn't even gone forward with it had he not spoken to you. What did you kind of see in it or say at the time, I guess, that took things forward?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably something I was thinking about in advance of this conversation, actually. And I'm sure we'll get onto this kind of dual co-founder thing compared to the single founder or whatever. But even though I was sales and marketing, commercial side, I was a sales rep in joints for 5 years for the company I worked for. So I had quite a good background in kind of knee surgery, and then I actually led the UK marketing team for knees for a number of years. So I think even though it was a sales commercial role, it was still a very technical role. around knee replacements, knee implants, knee surgery, or whatever. So I suppose it was more the fact that it was just really talking to something that I knew. It obviously made perfect sense to me that there was a gap. And I suppose John's just quite persuasive. That's his character, really. So there's a lot of kind of star energy and enthusiasm within John, and you kind of buy into that kind of stuff. So I think there's no big news here. It was just, I understood what he was talking about, and the fact that he kind of, he explained, I suppose, what a path forward would look like. Because I suppose that's the other thing, is my background is sales and marketing or commercial. For the first 4 years of our existence, we've been doing nothing technically sales and marketing. It's all been regulatory, technical, product development, fundraise stuff that wasn't really my wheelhouse.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess from a tangible perspective, to believe in it, there would be something to do with the USP of the product. Do you mind going into what, you would have thought, okay, we are doing something that is slightly different to what's already out there. Do you mind going into that a little bit more in terms of, I guess, explaining the product in a bit more detail and versus alternatives?
Yeah, Paul, do you want to do that?
Yeah, so I think in simple terms, the femur, the thigh bone and the shin bone, in terms of what makes up the knee, gets most of the attention when it comes to development, how the surgery is done. But the kneecap itself, or the patella, plays a big part in how your knee functions. And actually, all of the development dollars, for want of a better phrase, from everyone really, is focused on the thigh bone and the shin bone and the balance of the knee as it goes from fully extended to flexed. What John saw was that actually, even if you look at the kind of the big push towards robotics, or the kind of advanced augmented technologies for knee surgery, they still ignore the patella, and it plays a big part in how the knee actually functions. And also, if you look at how well knee replacements do, there's a big part of the patient population that are really satisfied with the outcome of knee replacement surgery, but there's this percentage of patients that are either dissatisfied or not happy, and actually a number of them complain about what's going on around the front of the knee, where the kneecap is. So there's a lot of development in knee surgery, but none of it was focusing on the patella, and therefore it was quite an empty space for us, and a little, I suppose, once we talked about it, a bit of a no-brainer. Someone needs to do something with regard to the patellofemoral joint in knees, and we had the opportunity to do that, and that's what we've done. So now our technology, really, what it does is it provides intraoperative data for the impact that the traditional part of the surgery is having on the loads going through the patellofemoral joint, and our technology allows the surgeon to see that data and make adjustments to the surgery based on that data that he's presented with. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, the goal is to try and avoid those patients who get pain following knee surgery, because it's a big procedure. It's about 8% are either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. Well, in the UK, that's 8,000 patients, maybe more, if they're doing over 100,000 a year. So it's not an insignificant number of people, and cost as well. So that's where the value proposition of the product is, because you've got the cost of the original surgery, but you've also got the cost of follow-ups, and then cost of any kind of treatments or management or anything like that. So that's the value proposition that we're offering.
Interesting. If I guess I was to ask you then, for the benefit of the audience, let's say they're in a position where they've thought of an idea like you had at the time, what things do you think people can do to validate that idea in, I guess, a cost-effective and timely manner? Because I presume, whether that was your original background already working in MedTech, but you would have done things to, okay, what's already out there, what's the market size, Have you got any advice on how people, I guess, can almost test their idea in a, I guess, efficient manner, if that's the word, to see if it's got scope and potential?
Well, for us, I think it was pretty simple. John talked about maybe this is the difference between founding and developing technology in a space that you've lived in and coming up with an idea that you're not in. I mean, the fortunate thing for us is, and probably driven more by John because of his global role, we've got this idea. Well, the best people to test that idea on are orthopedic surgeons, and we had access to those orthopedic surgeons. And I think, again, there's a lot of energy that goes into it, but there is an element of luck and serendipity. And John's family, he's got an electrical engineer as a brother and a data scientist as a niece, and we were able to build a prototype that kind of quite quickly, quite inexpensively, gave us some early data that we could then go and talk to this group of surgeons who weren't operating because it was locked down with COVID, and say, we've got this idea, we've done some early work, what do you think? And you can get pretty much immediate validation from surgeons who are, pretty big opinion leaders in the space. Now that may be fortune, or it may be, luck, or it may just be, well, that's just the path that we've paved for ourselves with our previous career. But that's how we did it.
Yeah, I mean, from going from idea in March to, I suppose the next thing was funding pitch. We went through developing a prototype, testing, getting data. We actually did a cadaver lab. And then we presented all of that to multiple surgeons and got feedback on. So we got a proof of principle, which we showed to multiple surgeons. And just on the proof of principle stuff, they got the idea. They got that there was an unmet need, and they understood that what we were presenting was a potential solution to that problem. Now, along the way, you've got patents and IP and all of that sort of stuff that you have to get in place to make sure you haven't blown the value of the business by sharing an idea. But once you've got all your IP in place, sharing your idea is the best thing you can possibly do. What the caveat there is, make sure you've gone through the process of protecting your IP. And also, we spent a lot of time searching to see, well, is this device patentable? Because, you're going to invest a lot of money. If it isn't protectable, then if you develop something that breaks new ground and solves a problem that no one solved, and it's not patentable, someone can just copy it. So there's no inherent value there.
Yeah.
So a big part of the first year was proof of principle and really understanding the IP landscape to make sure that we actually had a clearance to operate. No one else had patented the idea before, and B, that we could actually get coverage on the device to make it worthwhile investing in.
If I'm hearing correctly from you, I guess we'll go into this in terms of for founders early on starting out, would you say then that patenting an IP is essentially key to do as quickly as possible once you've had some kind of validation of that idea?
So it's a trade-off. You have to do it before you start sharing the idea widely.
Okay.
But if you do it too early, the patent that you apply for may miss out on some critical details that you don't understand because it's too early. So it is that there's no right or wrong. It's difficult. I mean, we now have 6 patents in flight. So your IP position builds with time if you're in a breakthrough area. And you always need to be thinking, is this a patent? Can I protect this in some way?
Yeah. If you look when you sorry, were you still going to say something else there?
No.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you look at when you kind of went to get funding and you got your patenting and IP in place, what you must have clearly thought, we've got this is a benchmark we've kind of hit that's suitable? Like, what did you see in your product that like we shouldn't elongate this anymore? Do you know what I mean? Like before actually going for funding, like what milestone do you think you kind of hit?
I think we talked to surgeons and they'd kind of validated the idea.
Yeah.
And I think we got like narrative from multiple surgeons, which we put into our pitch deck as a validation of the idea. So we had the science, we had the patent application, and we had kind of voice of customer from these kind of key surgeons basically saying, you know, this is an unsolved problem and what they're proposing is a good approach to try and solving this unsolved problem. So having got all of that, including the proof of principle data, that's when we started to pitch.
Makes sense. From a funding point of view, then, is there any other bits of advice you think you can share that, because there are some founders that I definitely have spoken to that haven't kind of gone about the funding journey the right way. You've already touched on as well, I guess, like how you spoke to surgeons, got your evidence together. Is there anything else that you think was quite important at that pitch to get right, to give yourself the best possible chance?
Well, I suppose innately, just because of our corporate background, we're always having to pitch projects and stuff like that. So, you know, people talk about the pitch deck, but the other thing actually is the team, which is quite an emotional thing because, you know, I start out, I own 100% of the business, and that's great, but 100% of nothing is nothing. And to build a team, you need to build a team and it's a multifunctional team to deliver the product and grow value. So I think today I own about 18% of the business, but our valuation is now about, well, it's probably around 20 million, something like that. Our last funding round. So we went from a 2 million valuation, actually 2.2 million valuation, to a 7 million valuation pre-money, to a 17 million or 17.5 million valuation. So that's not possible without a team, and you have to motivate, you know, you have to share that equity around to engage the team. And
sorry, I think specifically around the team in the early days, you know, the people that we brought on board at the start were really valuable in building the pitch, if you want to call it building the pitch. I mean, John's right. We've got corporate backgrounds, presenting that kind of stuff, building decks is kind of pretty much second nature. But actually, I think some of the feedback that we got is that you know, we had a good business plan. And I think there's probably a lot of entrepreneurs with ideas that think the idea in itself is actually the thing that's going to really turn potential investors on. But I think it's the credibility of the team, whether it's a small team, but we had a small team, but they were credible with a good track record in a variety of different areas. But we also built a solid business plan to support the pitch deck. And I think what I hear is a lot of people miss that out.
Okay. What specifically do you need to get right with the team? Is it certain skill sets, certain types of people? Do you mind elaborating on that a little bit more? Because you said it's important, but why is it important, and what do you need to get right with the team?
Well, you've got to look at the core competency of the founders, and not everyone, you know, Paul and I don't tick every box. Mm-hmm. We hadn't set up and run a business before. You know, we'd operated in big corporate. So, and we hadn't we'd done the finance side of things with a corporate finance partner, but that's very different from, you know, managing finance in an SME. So, you know, we plugged in a finance lead who kind of managed all of the finance operational stuff. And then we also plugged in another one of the founders was a guy called Mike Cripps, who'd set up and run lots of small businesses, had a financial background, but is very much a management leader as well, and he's just been invaluable in terms of contracting and that side of things that takes a lot of time, and there's a certain skill set to it which frankly I don't really have, and I'll let Paul speak for whether he thinks he's got it or not. So it's
plugging it in and John didn't know about it.
Yeah.
So it's very much, well, what skills do we need?
Yeah.
And you bring the people on board who have the skills, and different backgrounds, qualifications, and so forth.
I mean, that story's evolved, hasn't it, a lot, John, in terms of so I think there's also a timing thing, because very early on, our decision was that we would subcontract specialty stuff, expertise, quality management stuff, technical file stuff, those kind of things. And then as time progresses and maybe you go through your next fund round or whatever, and you start to hit milestones or success points, then you think, okay, well, that money could now be better served if we invest it in-house. And then you start to bring in new people. I mean, I think we've gone from a transition to having, quite a small, established, experienced initial team. And then, we talked about it when we met, and then we've kind of moved a lot of it. We've moved into a kind of a graduate program. And John's philosophy, and I'll be honest with you, it's all about accepting your gaps and stuff. The philosophy of let's go with graduates to fill kind of what were key roles for the organization as we were starting to, grow the organization. There was a little bit of hesitancy and reluctance from me, but actually, our recruitment strategy is employ some really smart graduates who have got an openness to new experiences and new learnings, who fit in with the company culture, and they will absolutely fly, and be brave enough to give them accountability, responsibility, become the subject matter experts in certain parts of the business. And that's just proven to be a real, like a tipping point for us in terms of the organization developing. And I know people say, oh, it's, graduates struggle to get roles, or graduates, they're not the caliber that you need, but that's just really not been our experience at all. Would you agree, John?
Yeah, no, not. I mean, I remember the first graduate that we brought on, it was like terrifying. It was a bit like, we're going to offer someone a job, because the other nice thing about Eventum was that no one at Eventum has actually been in employment before we employed them. So without Eventum, I mean, there were people working in bars and coffee shops and stuff like that, but so we've given we're now up to, I think it's 5 or 6 graduates. We've given them their first role, and they're not graduates anymore. They're now, well, frankly, doing all the hard work and getting into all of the nitty-gritty details of the regs and FDA submissions and all of that sort of stuff, which leaves Paul and I to run, to lead the business. So most of our time is spent now having kind of development conversations and so forth, and making the team work together most effectively. So you kind of, that first graduate, and each one we've added so far has been like a force multiplier, because beforehand you're doing everything, and then all of a sudden, right, I'm just going to give this bit to someone. That's something off my plate or Paul's plate, and you've got someone focused on that task. Then you give someone else. So I think we're probably at the right resource level at the moment, and it's at the stage now where basically they are running the day-to-day activities for the business. Having trained and upskilled them, they're all, CERs, PMCF, biological safety assessments, and so forth. We give them a lot of training. We spend a lot of money on training, and it's all paid off.
I mean, if there's one message that I'd love to come out of this, because I think there's a bit of a stigma about grads, isn't there? And I
Gen
just
Z.
think, yeah, they just, but I think there's an important point to make. But there's a stigma about Gen Z. There's a stigma about kind of work ethic and all that kind of stuff. But we've found, and we can't have the only ones, but there are some outstanding graduates out there that are really smart, that want to learn and want to be part of something. I think the purpose thing and being part of something is really important. But I also think that as employers, I think people are probably looking for the first mistake that they make, or the first they don't show up properly. And it's an easy kind of, there's the proof that I was right in the first place. And we're not saying that everything's been perfect, but we've invested time and development money, and we've supported people through that kind of transition period into the business. And if you put a bit of faith and a bit of trust and find the right people, they're outstanding employees, and there's a lot of them that are really struggling to get employment, which is, a bit of a shame, to be honest.
Crying shame, yeah.
Interesting though, like just from a selection point of view, I'm intrigued though, because you said a lot of the people you employed, like that was their first job. So what did you see in them to recruit them? So I'm sure you would have interviewed numerous people. How did you select the person you selected? What process did you follow?
I mean, there's been some connections, so there's been some people, there's been referrals to us. I mean, we've got a biological science, so if you think about, we're a MedTech company and all the things that go with that, but we've got a biological scientist, we've got a chemist, we've got a mechanical engineer, which may sound slightly more typical to kind of to what we do. We've got a computer scientist, and we've got a business. So we have interviewed for some of the, we've interviewed kind of multiple people for some of the roles, but we've also interviewed people who've been recommended to us, and they've, and we've kind of just hit the bullseye straight away, and they've turned out to be great employees. But I go back to are they smart?
It's just the basics of interviewing, isn't it? Because that's the other thing is, I've always interviewed. If someone applies for a job, I'll interview them. Someone wrote us a letter, an actual letter applying for a job. So, I'm definitely interviewing this person, and that's a face-to-face interview, because what we hear from, one of our grads was going through a big corporate interview process, and there was process, more like a glacial kind of. It's just a saga. Well, it's like some sort of medieval quest going through these interview processes at the moment. The video interview, the psychometric tests, the HR interview, it's just crazy. So what we basically do, classic competency questions, get someone to describe, something they've done, and ask them lots of questions and make sure that they did what they're saying, and what did they learn. And also, you're looking for someone who's self-reflective and can be coached.
So essentially, you backed your interview process essentially in terms of the questions you were asking, and if they would answer those questions well enough, it would give you confidence that was the right hire. Is that fair?
If we go to the process itself, is we get them to present on something they're passionate about, and it's their choice as to whether they want to dial it into what they can be cute, and they can try and tie it towards Eventum and the world of knee replacements or medical devices, but it's purely about present to us on something that you're passionate about, because you just want to see passion, don't you? That's important. Then we'll send them some of our documentation, and we'll say, right, digest that and come and talk to us about what have you interpreted from what we've sent you, and hopefully there's some salient points that are relevant from the documentation that we give them. And then we'll do a classic competency-based interview where it's really about, just tell us about these tasks, these situations that you found yourself in that relate to these particular areas. You know, what was the situation? What did you do? What was the outcome? How responsible for you about it? And what did you learn from it? And obviously the other thing is, because I think, again, that you've got to be comfortable with them, that their experiences that they're talking about may not be relevant to having worked in a corporate job, or, you know, it's kind of, a lot of it you've got to accept is it's life experiences, and that's absolutely fine. Whereas I think some other people will just see it as, well, they've got no experience. Well, if they can draw out some personal experiences from things that they've done about key aspects of behavior that matter to us, and they're engaging, then that's got to be okay. I think there's this kind of bizarre situation where people aren't impressed with their experiences because they haven't got any experiences. It's just like, well, what do you expect?
Yeah, it's like, but so I was thinking about it at the moment. So one of them is currently writing a clinical trial protocol. Well, I've never done that. But so what you're looking for is someone who's smart and is prepared to take on a challenge. Whereas, you know, if you're recruiting for someone, you say, well, we need someone who's written a clinical trial protocol. It's like, well, you know what? In a startup, everything you're doing is new. So it isn't about have you done it before? It's about, can you do hard things? Because the hard things keep coming, and, you know, they're always new and different. So it's that capability.
Yeah,
and then
that's an interesting point. Sorry, yeah, continue. Yeah, I was just going to say that's really interesting, actually, because that's actually an advantage you're saying, actually, of being entry level, right? Like I kind of, yeah, do you know what I mean? Like I kind of compare it to a bit of I'm into my sports and stuff, and sometimes you hear like captains and leaders talk about, actually, if you select a brand new young team, they've almost got no fear of failure, they've got no mental scars, they're more adaptable. So if you kind of take them and kind of play in a team, they'll kind of express their skill set, be willing to do new things. Whereas if you've got older senior members in that team, they might have some previous mental scarring, or be like, no, it's done this way. So almost got an advantage there. But what I'd be intrigued to know from you guys is, like, there's so many different qualities though, right? Like, for example, okay, how well did they communicate? How good are their academics? How well do they present? So many different things. But when you come away and have what things are you truly, actually, when you're both discussing, should we hire this person or not? What things are you truly looking at? What is a few important things do you think you say that, yeah, this is the person? Like, what generally do you feel you've discussed when you've made a hire to be like, oh, this person showed this? I
think after interviewing them, we're generally going, yeah, this person's a good person. And it's not so much that. It's like, oh, yeah, we should get. Actually, we end up having a discussion around risk factors.
I mean, John's bet, I think, do they come across as coachable? Because people have, you know, as John said, this business we started, and there were loads of things that we didn't know, and everything we did for the first, I was still doing new things, but pretty much every day everything's new. So are they coachable? Are they accountable? I think for me, accountability is a massive. It's a huge yes and a huge no if someone hasn't got accountability. And I think because the academics are a given, aren't they? Really, the communication skills. I think that's an interesting one, because that's one of the things that we work on most with them, I think, is communication skills. So I think if you bring someone in thinking that they've got to have good and I don't mean, I suppose it's not can they do copy, can they write well, are they literate or whatever, but being able to articulate yourself in the right situation, in the right way, is a learnable skill. And I think that's what maybe they come in without. So, you know, can you deliver executive summaries? Can you just give the detail that John needs in a conversation? Can you present to surgeons? Can you? So I think the communication skill for me is not something they need to have. They obviously need to be able to articulate themselves in written word, but the talking communication stuff is definitely trainable, and it's definitely not a no from me. And I don't think it is from John, because we've invested a lot of time and money in helping the team improve their communication skills.
Yeah, interesting. I guess what I'm a bit intrigued about is if I speak to founders of, and obviously you guys have worked in large corporates, that generally what I actually hear is, okay, large company, we've got the time and resources to invest into graduates, so they'll have a big graduate intake. But lots of smaller companies actually say, you know what, we're so limited on time and resource, we don't have the capacity to give this person time to train them, etc. But you kind of have invested a lot in that. So have you used like any external kind of
Well,
yeah,
no.
go on.
So when they come on board, they get a job to do. Well, if you come and do an internship at Eventum, and we have interns over the summer, you get given a job to do. I don't care. Even if we have 16-year-olds, we define it. We come up with a job and say, "Well, go and do this. I'll see you in a few days and show me what you've done."
I mean, we have. Sorry, John, but I think we don't have a graduate program. We are employing graduates into roles that we need doing for the organization. So they're not luxury items for us. They are part of the fabric of our business and our employees, and therefore we are investing time into getting them up to speed, because they are there to contribute to the business from day one.
Yeah. So an example might be, we give a smart graduate the project of reviewing and rewriting our PMCF process. Well, that's quite a task, but if they're smart and you give them time, and then if you give them the right training, then they can do it. And once you've done one thing, they can then apply that learning and that process to everything they do. So right now, two of them are also writing publications. And they're more than capable of doing it if you give them the right time, time to research. And also, we're lucky in that we interact with some quite high-level surgeons as well. So, they get feedback through that. So that's the people. We bring people in and we give them a job to do, and they teach themselves how to do that job.
Yeah. But Junaid, to answer your question, we've invested in presentation skills courses. We've identified that we need to bring in internal auditing in-house. So we've invested in courses for them to do internal auditing. We've done the same for PMCF, whatever. And we ask them, go away, look at what you might need within your role that is obviously relevant and is going to help Eventum move forward. Come to us with the suggestion, and if it's the right thing, we will invest that money in your training. So it's a bit of a classic. We spend a lot of time doing the kind of situational leadership. When's the right time to be directive? When's the right time to delegate? And then there's the on-the-job learning, and then there's also the appropriate investment in external training. And we've got another team day coming up soon where we're investing in an external consultant to come in. We've talked about we want to work on team dynamics. We want to develop executive summary communication, all of those things which we think the team could really benefit from. So I think it's a classic kind of hybrid blended approach to learning, but it seems to be effective and it seems to be appreciated. I think the other thing is, whilst they get areas of expertise that we want them to take responsibility for, we've got no problem letting them do other things just to keep the variety in their life, and the interest and the learning. And that's the big difference with a graduate program. The graduate programs where we used to work were pretty rigid in terms of what you were brought in to do. Whereas we've got people who came in as biological scientists, and what they do now, it's not related to their degree, and it's probably not as related to what they were initially brought on to help with, but the business has grown and we've needed this kind of resource allocating into these particular areas. And that's where they'll flow, to be honest.
Makes a lot of sense.
Might actually be the graduate scheme that's giving graduates a bad name, because you know, I do remember it's like, oh, you've got a graduate for 6 weeks, and it's like, if you're in a big corporate and you've got a graduate for 6 weeks, well, what are you going to do with them? You don't really own them. You're not truly vested in their development and all of that sort of stuff. Whereas at Eventum, we're truly invested in their development because we want them to perform as well as they can. Whereas the graduate schemes where people pop around all over a company, it's like, well, I think it's probably the graduate scheme that gives graduates a bad name.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I guess we move it on a little bit in terms of like your journey of 6 years when it comes to, because I know we touched on it in terms of when you had your idea, validating it with surgeons, getting funding. How did that product development journey go? Like, how long did that roughly take? And the reason I'm asking, what are some of the key things that you need to get right in the product development journey for people listening to this? What can they expect? What were some of the main challenges? I know I've asked a lot there, but yeah, if you don't mind going into that.
So I think you need to understand the regulatory pathway for the device that you're developing. Because, if you've got an idea that's a class 3 PMS, then you're going to need tens, hundreds of millions to bring it to market. And so understanding the regulatory pathway and also understanding that in different markets. So we had a very specific regulatory strategy by market to get us to where we wanted to be. So that's quite critical. And then understanding what verification validation you're going to have to do through your design development process to prove that the device performs to the intended need. Really important is defining the design inputs at the start and keeping control of those. They're important because the auditors will look at them, but they're important. We subcontracted design development, so they're important as the part of that process to make sure that what you're paying for from the design team, whoever that is delivering what you want. So all of that's important. And that, knowing that there's no point in just developing the prototype. It's actually the technical file that you're doing. You're building a technical file. You happen to make some product along the way because you need to build the technical file. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I remember we had a horrendous time through COVID. Helped us at the start, but was horrendous during production build. So we had to build our first batch to prove sterility and product validation. This was during the chip shortage. So we were building a batch of 200 units. And instead of chips costing $2, they were costing $50, $60 a chip. So that batch of 200 units but we didn't have a choice. We just had to do it. And it wasn't, like I say, that you had to do it to build the technical file because you had to do the sterility validation, you had to do the shelf life testing and all sorts of stuff, really. And then the other thing, sadly, in today's world, getting your notified body locked in, which is an utter nightmare. Because, we did it in parallel. So we were developing the product whilst developing our quality management system, whilst teeing up the date for submission of our technical file. So that was all dialed in, and we had a bit of latitude for movement, but it was all dialed in such that when we finished the production batch, we could submit our technical file to the notified body and get approval. I think a lot of people develop the product, then go, oh, I've got to develop my technical file. Now I've got to approach the notified body. Yeah. So juggling that was quite a stressful process, but it meant that we actually our approach was we developed the product, we completed the technical file, whilst developing the quality management system. We signed it off, and then we registered the product in New Zealand and did first clinical cases in New Zealand in parallel to getting the UK CA mark, because and I think it's still the case, the UK CA mark was aligned to the old MDD 2000 and I'm going to get the date wrong, 2004 regulation, as opposed to EU MDR, because EU MDR, there weren't any notified bodies available for a start, but also there's extra regulatory requirements and documentation, extra documentation requirements that we didn't have to do for New Zealand or America. So we went New Zealand, UK, America, and now we're just addressing EU MDR.
Makes sense. So from what I'm hearing, like it's super important of, okay, get your idea validated, talk to relevant people, but focus on that regulatory pathway quite early on. It sounds like, because to be honest, like I said, I've spoken to people who kind of start looking at regulations at different points, but it seems like you did all of that kind of, I guess, the technical file regulatory work quite early on. And do you feel in your journey that's essentially ended up saving you, I guess, time, money? What's been the benefit of that? If you like play, I guess, devil's advocate, if you would have gone down the product journey before doing all of that, what would that have led to? Like,
well, our first audit, the auditor came in and said, show me your first design inputs document, which we did have, and we pulled out and we said, there's our design inputs document. And I think I remember it to this day, because some of these experiences scar you. She said, well, it says in here that it doesn't define the sterilization method. We said, no, it doesn't. That's correct. Because our first document, we didn't know what the sterilization method was. We just said it to be used in a sterile environment. And she did, well, I've been audited a lot in my previous role. So she started to come after us and say, well, that's not good enough. So we said, no, it's for the time that we signed that document off, which was right at the start of the project, that was the correct scope. Now, we could then go back and say, oh, look, in 6-8 months later, we defined it as ethylene oxide sterilization. There you go. So the auditors will want to know that chain of events. And if you've not, if you use design inputs to manage the process, that's a good thing anyway, because you get what you want. You have to think about what you want, you get what you want, but also the auditors will want to see that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. So I guess it is such a regulated industry. It's an interesting topic, isn't it? Because I guess so many founders, I don't know if you agree, can maybe get caught up in their own idea sometimes and start to just almost get so caught up in the engineering and development of the product and completely forget that there's a whole body and regulations that kind of oversee all of this, and you need to factor that in from the start of the journey. I don't know if you'd agree with that, essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, with the quality management system we now have, and we sort of did this implicitly, but now the first thing we would do is build a trace matrix and do the risk analysis.
Yeah.
And the trace matrix will be linked to the design inputs, and we'd start to define the verification validate. In fact, so if we're planning a new project, the first thing and sometimes you adjust the scope of a product based on the regulatory requirements, because certain things you've already got documentation for and certain things you don't, and some of the documentation costs a lot of money to build.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we spoke about this when we actually met face to face, that I don't know if you'd agree, but your corporate backgrounds might have helped with developing, actually planning and setting out, okay, what processes are we going to follow, and kind of following that process. And kind of, in corporate environments, you have to think of risks, opportunities, what could happen, what might not happen. And you kind of factor that into the process rather than just going gun-ho, like this, I guess, a stereotypical kind of entrepreneur that kind of has loads of ideas and just starts going with it and then works it out as they go along. So that's probably been an advantage being of that corporate background, right?
So it sounds very sad, but it's all covered in ISO 13485. It's not a bad document. I think we can, it's actually quite a good process. And if you follow it through your development, then it'll save you time in the long run.
It's one thing I do definitely want to touch on. This is the first episode that we've done with, I guess, co-founders. And Paul, I know you kind of alluded to it at the start. Like, if I ask you this, what's been if you had to like put this in mind, that if it was just yourself doing this journey versus having a co-founder, what would that mean for you? And what's been the benefit of having someone else in that journey?
Well, it wouldn't have happened, I don't think. And then I suppose that for the co-founders, there need to be different but complementary personalities, and I think that's what we are. And I've always said a huge compliment for John is his start energy is incredible. He's always, moving forward, and he does live into that fail fast, good enough, go. There's obviously elements of, from a technical file, regulatory stuff, you've got to be pretty much perfect on those things. But I think there's an energy there. And I think where I complement that is I bring a little bit of healthy conflict and reflection to John's kind of thinking. And I think it's the dark, when someone's having a tough day. I mean, the great thing, I suppose, for us is tough days don't last very long and they don't linger. We get problems, but we solve problems quickly, and we may not solve them perfectly, but we solve them and we move on. But when you do have those dark days, having someone who's there, who's your co-founder, there's a good chance that they may be in a slightly different place to you. They might be in a positive place, and you've just got that kind of camaraderie that allows you to move out of it. Whereas I think if you're doing it on your own, I think the dark days probably linger longer, or the hard days linger longer, than when you've got someone there who's kind of like, knows what you're going through, has been along for the journey, understands that decisions need to be made for the business, and can provide a little bit of objectivity to move on. So I think key is, I think it's great being co-founders, but I also think it's important that you have those different but complementary personalities, and I believe John and I do.
Yeah, resilience. I mean, the resilience you need to do this stuff is just, it's like a mountain, isn't it? And I think having the resilience of two people is, because sometimes it's just, we've had some pretty horrendous days, and it's like just getting through. Doing that on your own would be quite hard, very hard, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess if you were to talk to, founders, having been on this journey for 6 years, if there are founders and leaders out there, what things would you say to them who are trying to go on this journey? What are the important things to get right? And it's a very broad question, but I guess it'd be a good perspective as well. Like, actually, if someone was in a corporate environment like you guys were in for a big period of time, what things can they expect that are very different to corporate as well, like that they can almost be prepared for if they were trying to go on a journey like yourselves? And what do you think they've got to get right?
Well, I mean, I think in corporate you're building quite specific teams, aren't you? And you're surrounded by other teams that provide, functional support for you. If I look back at my experience, I think the challenge with that is that everyone's supposed to be, we used to talk about the patient being the North Star in the corporate organization, but therefore everyone is aligned on making sure that the most important thing is the patient, and everything we do is about the patient. But actually, that's not really how it plays out in reality. Individuals in departments are making sure that those individuals and those departments are actually things reflect well for them. So there can be a lot of malalignment when you've got big corporates with big teams that are supposed to be supporting each other to drive the organization forward and support patients. So I think the team that you have around you is really critical. I think the pace of things is something that you've got to get your head around. But I don't say you have to get your head around it. It's such a wonderful thing. Corporate is slow. SME is fast if you want it to be. And I know fast isn't always great, but at least you can build really good momentum as a startup and as an SME if that's the way you want to operate. And I think that's the way you need to operate.
There's no in a corporate world. There's quite a lot of political language, political behavior, and all of that sort of stuff. Whereas in an SME, particularly the scale we're at, it's a really nice size where everything is just an open and frank and honest conversation, and the goal is to kind of understand the problem and move on as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
What I find interesting, we actually spent quite a lot of time talking about team in this, and I won't keep you guys too much longer. But I think that's a good thing, because actually, what I tend to find, speaking to people in your kind of position, that there's only so, and we kind of touched on it, there's only so much you can do by yourself, John. And I think you mentioned an example that you've got graduates doing things which you don't know how to do. Now, if you look at that example now, you can get output generated from areas where you don't even have the expertise, right? So as long as you're able to play that situation well of building a strong team, that seems to be a lot of the foundation of what you guys have achieved. The last question I probably will leave you with, though, is that finding the people is one thing, but you could almost argue that graduates early on in their career, once they've got a job, they can look kind of externally. How have you incentivized them to stay with you? So other founders and leaders can maybe take that kind of advice, and what can they do to retain talent, I guess, and keep growing? What have you managed to do to achieve that?
Go on, John.
Well, so the first thing is they're all shareholders. So when they first join, they get an allocation of stock. We pay pretty well, and we put them all, they're all on the same pathway. So if you're a graduate in the organization, they don't really talk salaries, but they're all on the pathway to earn the same amount of money over a, like, let's say 3 to 4 year period. So there's that pathway, and based on what they deliver, we probably pay them more than they would earn as, they're not graduates anymore, but they're probably in the top quartile for what they're doing. So that's one thing. Then I think it's the environment as well, because actually because there's all this stuff about working from home and stuff like that. Actually, what I think they want is to be involved in a team. I think they want to be challenged, and they want to be given responsibility and ownership for things. And that's what motivates them. So the other conversation we've had is like 2 or 3 years at Eventum is probably the equivalent to 10 years at a corporate, because the experience they get, the exposure that they get, all of that sort of stuff. And they might end up working a corporate job, but probably I'd like to think they'll reflect on their time at Eventum as being the best time of their lives in terms of working career.
Awesome.
Nothing to add to that.
Perfect. No, look, guys, it's been great speaking to you. I'm sure people that will be listening will take a lot of, I guess, inspiration and a lot of guidance, I guess, from what you've shared. There's lots of people, like I say, that come up with ideas, but the honest truth is actually do nothing with it. And I guess you guys are examples of taking an idea to where you've got it to in a period of 6 years, which is great. Was there anything you wanted to kind of add in terms of what you got planned going forward before I let you go?
We're going to dominate the US.
I was going to say the same thing. That's our dream.
It's our aspirational goal.
I think one of the things that we've always said is this is tough to do, and I don't think startups get any kind of breaks from, with the greatest of respect, with external consultants. It's just as expensive for a startup to do something than it is for a corporate, but their pockets are deeper. And we've always been. So if anyone does watch this and anyone is on this path and they want some help, or they want some information, or they want to steal something from us that can help them, then we'd love to do that, because obviously living it takes longer than you think, and it costs more money than you think. So that's probably my final words. And therefore, if there's anyone out there that can give you a break, then I think the community should be doing that. And we're quite prepared to do that as well, because it gives us a great amount of satisfaction to help people.
Yeah, you might have a few people texting you now, Paul. But yeah, no, appreciate that. Look, thanks guys for your time. And yeah, maybe speak soon.
See you soon.
Cheers then. Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
See
Bye.
you, John. See you, Junaid. Bye.
Bye. See ya.